started this project, I knew a pandemic was happening, but I can't say I anticipated how much everything else would go wrong at the same time. I mean, really, let's have a moment of silence for the absolute masterpiece that has been 2020 so far. Moving on, I actually started filming this the day after I announced it, many eons ago. So the project has taken a few weird twists and turns since then, but let's get into it anyway.
Despite having just draped a gown bodice for this child a few months ago, here I am doing it again. Somehow I have managed to not lose the sleeves from that pattern, thank goodness, but the bodice has evaporated. Oh well, practice is good. But draping on children is twice as hard as on adults. They fidget, and they fall over easily. Pro tip, off-screen iPad with any kids show that doesn't make you hate your existence. I decided to pop a side seam in the bodice even though it's not strictly necessary. I've learned to leave as much growing room in gowns as possible, so this will be a quick alteration next time my child hulks out. I don't know where the footage went, but after checking the lining for a final fit, I cut the outer fabric. Here you can see I'm cutting out a new lining because this lutestring is ridiculously thin. I wanted a sturdier interior than I'd originally chosen. As you can see, I am cutting out the lining from really weird pieces of linen, and that's because I have a ridiculous amount of linen scrap lying around. The last thing I wanted to do with this project is waste anything, and I've already had to cut out 2 linings.
Well, that was early April. For most of the month and the next, I was working non-stop, literally, not even taking weekends. And the fact that this gown ended up being historically problematic in more ways than one meant I didn't really feel like dealing with it. By the time late May rolled around, I finally found a way to reconcile my historical concerns, but I had no interest in doing a dress diary after my dress in a day video. So, here are some progress photos.
If you're wondering whether or not I hand-stitched this whole thing, don't. Of course I did. This is what happens when you're sewing and talking on the phone at the same time. You get real stabby with the pins, unnecessarily. The sleeves did more or less survive their stabby end, but they are a bit wibbly and I don't love it. This gown actually came together very quickly once I picked it up again. The historical techniques don't actually take you a lot of time, because 18th century mantua makers knew what they were doing. But the one thing that I had a problem with was the fabric itself. I love lutestring, it's amazing to wear, but for this, I should have chosen a stronger taffeta or a wool. Putting those eyelets in the back was a major issue. I tried 2 other techniques that did not involve putting the eyelets straight through the fabric. They didn't work. As the final eyelet choice was permanent, that's what we went with, and it actually turned out fine. It's just not what I would have preferred to do.
During the 18th century, there was a bit of a shift in terms of children's clothing. You may have heard before that children dress like tiny adults, and that's true to an extent. But in the 1770s, children began to have more freedom of dress. It seems to me that most of Felicity's dresses are modeled after earlier styles of dress, and I don't know if that's because American Girl was just going for a colonial, or it could just be that they wanted to put Felicity in a pretty pink dress. That's fine too. It doesn't really matter, unless you're me and you're trying to make this as historically accurate as possible. Anyway, let's just take a look at the dress and I'll explain the choices that I made for this.
Well, here she is. You can see that the bodice point sort of floats above the skirt, right? That's because the petticoat is actually only attached on the inside. This allows the bodice to float freely and give a really pleasing effect. Oh, the sleeves. So, Felicity's original dress has these pleated cuffs, and I'm pretty sure this is a very solidly 1760s and earlier thing, but because it's part of the dress and we really wanted to copy as much as possible, I went ahead and put them on, but they're completely removable. The sleeves also feature this lovely sleeve ruffle, very simple. It's just a rolled hem strip of fabric whip stitched onto a tape that can be tacked into place and then removed later for cleaning if needed. On the original gown, Felicity has these little flowers at the cuffs, and I decided not to include them, mostly because I think they are unnecessary, let's put it that way. On one side, I did end up tacking down the back of the cuff, and I actually need to remove that. It ended up pulling really badly later. The sleeves are set into the lining first in the 18th century manner with a separate shoulder strap covering all of that. You can see here my massive seam allowance. The fabric is so thin you can actually see through it, which I did not anticipate. It's pretty common to put a little seam allowance into gowns, especially at the hem for children that grow, but the last time I did this for my daughter, she decided to troll me and bulk out at the shoulders. That's why I put so much in here. And now for everyone's favorite bit, or at least mine. You can kind of see here how the petticoat has been attached to just the lining with a strip of fabric to cover the raw edges, but let's take a look at these eyelets of doom. I mentioned before that I tried two other methods of putting the eyelets in that involved plackets in order to avoid shoving eyelets through this very weak fabric. Unfortunately, that caused an awful lot of pulling and it looked generally terrible, so I went ahead and reinforced the back with some tape and put the eyelets straight through the fashion and lining fabrics. Once again, lots of seam allowance visible here. It shouldn't be a massive undertaking to take this out, especially because I've also included seam allowance at these straps. One of my favorite things about 18th century gowns is that all of the raw edges are more or less encased except for this weird part under the arm. So there we are at the sleeve strap, and apparently I did a terrible job tacking down this tucker, so I'll have to fix that. But for now, let's take a look at how this gown actually goes together. It's sort of a backwards round gown, which, while I have no evidence this actually existed, it's sort of a combination between two styles of dress that I've seen for children. For girls about this age and around this part of the century, you'll either see a separate bodice and petticoat, or you'll see a gown that's made all in one with the back of the petticoat attached to the back of the dress, with a split where the lacing holes are. For younger children, the split will go straight to the hem of the gown, but for girls 7, 8, 9, 10, I have seen the split joined in the back. Because I put so much seam allowance in the bodice, I know for a fact my daughter is going to troll me once again and grow upward first instead. So there is a ridiculous amount of fabric left in the hem of this gown for her to grow as she pleases. I am very much hoping that I can get this gown to last at least until she's 10 or 11, and then at that point she can start transitioning to a more grown-up wardrobe. Ah, the apron. If you'll recall in my introduction video, I had the ridiculous plan to make possibly 3 separate aprons. One plain linen, which would be the most appropriate for Felicity, one with this embroidered cotton, which matches the main inspiration painting for this entire project, and one that is a colorfully embroidered cotton based on both this apron and my own design. I actually have this digitized, and I'm really sad that I'm unable to use it, but my embroidery machine has decided to no longer perform that function, so until it decides to get over itself, we are stuck with this one. Honestly, I'm not that mad about it. It's quite nice. It was not very expensive. It took almost no time to put together. My only actual complaint is that these little floral star embroidery bits do not go all the way up through the fabric. They're just at the hem, but it works. So let's try it on.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you come back next time when I'll be decorating a hat for the next portion of this project, which will be Felicity Saves the Day. That dress I'm very excited about because it's the one that makes the most sense historically to me, and it should be really fun. I seriously encourage you to go check out the first couple of episodes, at least, of the American Girls podcast, where they do focus on Felicity and point out the not so pretty parts of her stories. There's a gentleman named Marcus and a woman named Rose in there that are enslaved by Felicity's family, but it's not something that the books really talk about, and they should. They definitely should, but they don't.